Colin and I are co-founders, and we are super excited to have Rick Deacon here to talk with us about his experience. And Rick is head of platform at NeuroVitals currently, and he has a great security background. We'll get into that in just a minute. Before we do that, I just want to give a quick overview of the product that we're going to be talking about, just to give you a little context. And then Colin will just give a very quick demo. So it won't take long, just a few minutes to give you better context. And with that, I'm going to do a screen share. And so what we're seeing in the marketplace is this wonderful push on AI. I mean, people are coming up with just brilliant ideas. We're seeing all sorts of really interesting prototypes. But there's a gap between the prototypes and production, and Gartner says 85%, MIT said 95%, but most of these initiatives fail. And they fail for multiple reasons. Security vulnerabilities is a huge one, and I've seen a lot about that lately. But also scalability issues, and also just the general opaqueness of anything that's developed with AI assistance. And so people feel like they don't really know what it's going to do, and they don't feel comfortable with it, so they don't deploy it. So what we're talking about is a combination of products. We have a front-end AI architect that actually helps you give visibility to what it is you're building. And so it's a map of everything going on, and I'll get more into that in just a minute. But also it has an underlying plugin security module. And so it creates a really secure underlying foundation for anything you're building, whether it's an AI agent or an app. So that is the atPlatform. And what the atPlatform provides is complete zero trust. It uses cryptographic keys. It has end-to-end encryption for all the communications. It is invisible to bad actors. You don't open up any ports on your servers. And it integrates with existing infrastructure. So you don't have to open up holes in your firewalls in order to have agents and applications available. And both Rick and Colin can talk more about that, but it is the underlying foundation. So just like you wouldn't build a house without that underlying secure foundation, that's what the atPlatform is. But the other part that we want to talk about is upfront design. And a lot of people today are coding from a prompt, and it's fun and fast, but you would never build a house that way. So I want a roof and a skylight. That just wouldn't work. So with this, you get an architected blueprint. And so what we're saying you do here is you map out the data flows in advance. So you have all of the items in a map and show where the data is flowing. And then that gives you a beautiful blueprint to review with all the stakeholders. Then you take that, and what AI Architect does is output that into JSON. And then the JSON becomes this long prompt that you can put into an LLM and build the product. And so once you have that product, you can go back and use the map to audit the product to make sure it's doing exactly what it's doing. So you get visibility on the front and visibility on the back. So really powerful way to build very secure apps because it uses the underlying atPlatform. So this actually will enable a lot of future apps and agents as well. The platform has an external name service, which means the same agent can be running across multiple organizations, but the policy, it's dictated by the policy in that organization. So you can have much more restricted policies in one organization versus another, and the agent will go with whatever policy it needs to. So super beneficial for cross-organization applications and agents. There's also a chain of trust with cryptographic signatures and restricted access agents. So you can give fine-grained controls over any given agent, and it could be time controls, it could be access controls. So really powerful underlying platform there. And with that, I'm going to let Colin go ahead and do a demo.
Thanks, Barbara. So what does AI Architect actually looks like? It looks like a web page, and this is the web page. You have some options up front. I'm just going to start a new blueprint and sort of show you what the environment looks like. It's a drag and drop environment, so you can drag and drop people, entities, and things. And any application or flow is going to have people, entities, and things in there, and then they're going to be surrounded by, obviously processes. Or APIs perhaps, or other things I haven't thought about. And essentially, what you need to do is write up your business flow across the AI architect, and basically tell the LLM, give it clues as to exactly what your application or agentic flows need to be. You can join them up. There's different types of connection types. You can hover over these, and there's a bunch of documentation down here as to which things to do. We've got some other extensive documentation online as well. But you just pick a data a communication. So asynchronous is you don't know whether the other thing's up and running. But you can send it, and when it comes online, it will pick it up. Synchronous, much the same, but you know the other thing's online, and it will send it synchronously. RPCs, remote procedure calls, things like you're going to send a large job. I want an answer back. Or maybe you're doing a data stream to an LLM, and you don't know how long that stream is, but maybe you're interacting with LLM, and you want to have an answer, but you don't know how long that is. You can just hit data stream, and you start drawing up your blueprint of your application or agentic system. Rather than keep drawing this, I'll show you some examples, some real live ones. This is probably the simplest blueprint we have, but it's a real live application. It's for a radio transmitter. So there's KYZ, the radio station. It's monitoring a radio transmitter with an application, and that's all you needed to do. You export the prompt, and this is all the LLM needs to write the application and all the agents. So it's very, very simple. What comes out of that is sort of an agent you can deploy and a real life application. This is the real life application that came out of this prompt. This is real live data from a real life radio station. What's interesting though is you can keep this blueprint, and as things change, you can update it. So there was a new model that came out from the Gemini team, I think last weekend. And so, we didn't want to write the agent at the radio station, but we did rewrite the application. And so we essentially exported this prompt, put it into the Gemini environment, and an application that looks very similar came out, but it's using the Gemini model. So you put these sort of side by side, and they look very, very similar. But the Gemini model did a much better job of the settings. So this is sort of the settings. This is with Claude Code, and this is with Gemini, much neater. So what we're finding is these models are getting much, much better at doing UIs, and it's trying to remember what you prompted. Oh my word, that's very, very difficult. And you're moving from one model to another is something that this tooling allows you to do, which is sort of fascinating. The sort of the API, if you like, into agentic coding is the prompt, and we just have a very, very long prompt. These things can get very complicated. This is one for sort of family office automation. Another one for sort of replacing your CRM. These things get very complicated and multi-pages. So there's different pages on this stuff. So you can present all the data flows to your business and then just export the prompt. So that's a very fast sort of run through. Rick obviously has deep experience in this. So what I'm intrigued to hear is from Rick is what was that experience, and how did it help? So back to you, Barbara.
Great. Rick, can you please introduce yourself? I love your background in cybersecurity, so I want
Yeah,
to hear all about it.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rick Deacon, and I have been in cybersecurity for over 18 years at this point. I started out as pen tester, ethical hacker, red team, whatever you want to call it these days. And I worked for, a bunch of big companies, big banks, consulting them, hacking them, and letting them know what they needed to fix. that eventually evolved into me wanting to start building things on my own and essentially turn that talent into the opposite of like, okay, I can break things, but can I fix them? So I started building cybersecurity startups around 2012 in Silicon Valley. Sold products to really big companies like Coinbase and Gemini, uh, Monsanto, places like that. Basically, just selling products, building cybersecurity, and then that evolved into really actually working in Web3 and trying to see kind of what the advancements that Web3 could bring to both security and to the web. Unfortunately, what I found there is that security is even worse in Web3, but that's another conversation for another day. Now as we approach kind of, 2024, 2025, 2026, I started working with AI directly to both benefit the cybersecurity products I was building and working with, and then also now kind of allowing me to go even deeper and work even more, like on my role as head of platform, where I'm able to essentially architect the entire platform, develop it, and then still keep security in mind the whole time. So at this point, I'm kind of like I would call it an operator and cybersecurity expert, so I can kind of jump in and solve problems and simultaneously remember all of my years and years of cybersecurity experience. So that's me.
Yeah, huge kudos to NeuroVitals for having their head of platform be a cybersecurity expert. That just speaks to how much they value security and privacy. So huge kudos to them. So you took on a very challenging timeline in this role, though. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, effectively, when I joined the team as head of platform, there was a 3-month timeline from the day I started until the very first launch of the MVP. And in this case, the MVP is going to 100 power users is what we'll call them. We have our own special name for them, but it's effectively 100 power users that are vetted by us, confirmed by us, and make sure that they're a good user base. But as everybody knows, day one, I don't know anything. Day 15, I still don't know anything. I'm ramping up and learning the team and understanding the vision, understanding how things need to be built, what our goals are, and then also all of the other, human aspects of it, like still just getting used to working with everyone and seeing who I need to gather inputs from and who needs to see the output. So effectively, I had a very short timeline and still do because the timeline's not up. Still do have a very short timeline to deliver what is our very first working product that deals in a space that is sensitive from a number of ways. It deals with sensitive data, it deals with personal information about individuals, revealing things about their mental and physical health, and that's all very important as something you already mentioned related to cybersecurity, but also important to make sure we're outputting a product that people actually want to use, especially when we're dealing with things like mental health. So,
Yeah, so you do you want to talk a little bit about your process that you went through and the blueprint that you created and how you went back and forth with that?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to kind of dive into like the beginnings of what I went with AI Architect and then also kind of how it got started. So,
Yeah.
obviously going into the head of platform, I knew we were using atsign. I knew that AI Architect was going to be part of what we were doing, but I hadn't really had the time to dive in and see exactly what was going to happen. So it kind of all started with reviewing the workflows that were created by the atsign team for NeuroVitals to basically overlay not even a workflow from a diagram perspective, just like here's your inputs and here's your users and here's your outputs and here's what we think is going to attach in real simple human readable language. Like here's your user and here's the doctor and here's the habit that you want to form and here's the thing you might want to get rid of. And those were in various diagrams, just written in slide decks. So that's where it kind of all began. But thankfully, due to the effort from the Atsign team and being able to build out those diagrams, I was able to then start to reverse engineer kind of how I felt AI Architect was going to work. So then I jumped into AI Architect, started building very simple workflows from what I believed our app was going to look like. But I realized relatively quickly there was an easier way to do it. So, what I did was combine the multiple diagrams in the PowerPoint into what I would call a kind of larger workflow, where now you have all of the entities and all of the inputs and outputs and all of the people who are going to interact with the application laid out in one location. And I also went and looked at all of Atsign's documentation for AI Architect. How does it work? What does it do? What are the connections for? What are the naming conventions? How does it display the JSON? How is it organized? And then I took that information and I took our information on the NeuroVital side with the big diagram, put it into my favorite, which at this point is still Claude. And then I had Claude essentially analyze that information and tell me, okay, so how do we make this into readable JSON that I can import into @sign? And then that becomes a more easy approach to the complexity that we're having. Like for example, the transmitter, the radio transmitter that Colin showed, that's what, 4 or 5 nodes in total.
Yeah.
Ours, I believe, is in the 40 something range nodes, and it's a spider web of just information. But the good news is that after I was able to put that information into Claude and have it understand how @sign's AI Architect worked, I was able to get out JSON that I could import back into AI Architect. Now, that initial go of it was only probably, you know, 50% of everything I needed to do because I took a backwards approach instead of taking the logical and forward approach, which is here's my node, draw the good line. Here's my node, draw the good line. I said, dump it all in there. So what I got was 30 nodes stacked on top of each other, and I couldn't see anything below. So that was just a user problem. That was a me problem. And I worked on then changing that to be more human readable, just making sure the nodes are in the right place. And then I spent the time, of course, to make sure that did the output of Claude match what I wanted for @sign? Because at this point, I was more worried about the bottleneck being Claude's understanding of what I wanted, not whether or not AI Architect could actually do it. So that's kind of how I got started with AI Architect and got my first working blueprint, which then was passed over to the team. Now, that doesn't get us into the development side yet, so I'm happy to talk on that, but I just said a lot, so I want to make sure there's no other clarification points we should talk about in there.
I just love to use it to sort of used AI to help create your sort of first blueprint is it's just a yeah I mean
My laziness
that's what
knows
these
no
things are.
bounds, Colin.
Yeah,
My
no,
laziness knows no
absolutely, but
bounds.
it's exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And just having a tool to visualize that stuff I think is is what we need, right? As humans we need to be able to see what those flows are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so jump into the next step.
Okay. So from there, the one thing I noticed was, okay, sure, I need to get this approved. And one thing I did notice from that was that because this is a very easy to read diagram that comes out of AI Architect when you're viewing it in the web, not the JSON, not the export, but a very easy to read diagram once it's in there. Anyone who's seen a workflow can pretty much read it. That being said, we all know no one actually wants to read. So I had to take it upon myself to essentially digest all of that down to a method where I could pass it to everyone really quickly so we could get it approval in meetings versus take this offline, read it, come back, and then ask your questions. We wanted questions and Q&A immediately. So got it to a point where I was like, okay, this is what it does. Here's how it displays. Here's the nodes you need to pay attention to. Do we agree that this aggregator is in the right place? Do we agree that this is how we're going to handle APIs using this AI Architect node? Do we agree that these are our users and the naming conventions even for these users? Once I had all of that agreement, I then started to see what the AI Architect output was going to create. But I paused, and given my uh, sort of penchant for already creating apps in the past using Claude Code and using AI in general, I decided that I needed a little bit more. Thankfully, I have a person on our team who is on the UI UX side, and what he ended up doing was creating his own UI UX PRD, a product requirements document. So in that document, it laid out here's the colors. Here's the kerneling for the text. Here's the spacing for buttons. Stuff that AI Architect is not really going to point out initially because it's more focused on how it functionally is going to work. So thankfully, due to his work and then that PRD, I created a more large PRD that took AI Architect's outputted prompt that Colin showed. I put it directly into the PRD and I said, this is the underlying functionality that has to be used. This is the design PRD. And I gave it to Claude, of course. And I said, make me a big PRD. So make me an even larger PRD out of this. And then what I did from that is also confirm to it a couple things, which are very important. One, I told it absolutely do not change anything that you see from the AI architect prompt output. That is gospel. It has to be delivered the way that is written there, obviously, and then interpreted into the LLM correctly. So I told it not to change that, just to include it as sort of an artifact inside of the PRD. Once I did that, I had the amazing design that came from the UI UX side, and I had this massive PRD. I threw this PRD into truthfully, a guideline and sort of framework that I've created for myself using Claude definitions, right? Claude.md and other Claude files that make sure it goes through the proper gates, that has the right QA, it follows the flows, and it can't actually, it's called contract as code, and it can't basically break the contract to write the code. And that is kind of my own creation. Not that it's super novel, but I want to make sure I have these constraints in place. So I fed the PRD into my little framework. And then what I started getting was a beautiful, usable, functional first version of the application. And I think of note, my first use of my framework was for something completely unrelated to NeuroVitals, completely unrelated to Atsign. It was something I was building for just another project I was working on for fun. And it took 8 days in total for me to get it from my first prompt to no PRD, just a prompt to something workable that the guy I was working on it with was like, okay, cool. When I used AI Architect, exported it as a PRD, created the correct PRD, and fed it back in, I was done with the very first version in like 3 hours, something like that. The very first version, and that includes all the annoying prompts like, "Are you sure you want to run this bash command?" that Claude Code always tells you, including all of me sitting there and making sure I hit yes on those, which I should have just suppressed, but I didn't. And then I had the first working version of the NeuroVitals MVP in, 3 hours. And it wasn't even something that required a lot of debugging. It didn't output, well, no, the database didn't work, or no, the front end is broken and it's, off. It actually output an app that on the very first rip, one shot, I would say, it was completely usable. Of course, there's always fine tuning. And then I also got word from the UI UX, like, I changed my mind on this, so I had to go back and do it, which is always part of agentic coding. You have to go back and clean it up. But the key is that in my opinion, AI architects allowed that back end to be delivered in that 3 hours with those proper constraints and with the proper, understanding because it exists. And then, the everything else I added to it on the PRD just help the AI drive and learn what it needed to read through before it could actually write that code instead of taking 8 days like that app I wrote prior. And truthfully, the app I wrote prior was much simpler, much, much simpler than what I'm building at NeuroVitals. So yeah, that was kind of my flow for getting that first version. And to this moment, I'm still building off of that first MVP, and it's getting better and better every day. Just adding new things, integrating other partners that we've onboarded, vision changes even. But hey, that's what happens. So
Very impressive. I want to jump into the security aspects of this. There was a question in the chat about open ports. Colin, do you want to address that one real quickly, and then we'll jump in with
Let's see whether Rick wants to answer it.
okay, there
Because
we go.
I'm
well,
pretty sure Rick carries around with him a Wireshark bag because he doesn't
Yeah,
many things.
yeah, I
true.
mean the answer to that question, I didn't actually see the question, so I'm going off of what you just said. But if
It says
essentially the
you make
idea.
things invisible to bad actors. How exactly does that work? You have to have listening ports somewhere, right? And sure.
Yeah, somewhere, except for the fact they're not visible to the attacker, which is exactly right. I would assume, because I've never actually got to see what is behind the scenes on the Atsign architecture, but I would assume there are some going on in the servers that no one can see. But the
I
idea
will tell
is,
you, yeah, I'll fill in that detail, but from your
sure.
perspective, what's going
Yeah.
on, and then I'll tell you how it works.
So from my perspective, the only thing, the way that it actually works is that there's no ports open because all you are having is your own at sign, which is my name at Rick, and then I'm talking to Colin at Colin. And the only people who we can actually speak to and access that information is our own decryption keys on our own devices. So the only way to actually do anything over what we'll call the at sign protocol is to unlock it using your own encryption keys and then have send it and then only person who can unlock it on that side is Colin using his own decryption keys, and then therefore you have a fully encrypted transmission along the wire, and there isn't a need for these ports to be open because they're that's not how the communication works using the Atsign protocol. Now, all the gaps I missed, please fill in, but that's
Yeah,
how it works,
so
and that's why I did it.
yeah, so from a network perspective, we only use TCP, and the reason why we only use TCP because it's a flow, and it means that infrastructure can check that flow and firewall it effectively. Um, from an application point of view, it only ever makes an outbound connection, so that's why there's no ports open on either at Colin or at Rick. There's no ports open because you're only ever making an outbound connection from that. All those outbound connections are connecting to somewhere, right? And that port has to be open at that somewhere. And that somewhere is an individual Docker container for every single ad sign. So every ad sign has its own individual Docker container. Very big design decision at the early stage of the company, and an unusual one, right? So normally you'd have a big server, and the problem with a big server is it can never be distributed. So if I had a big server, then what if Rick wants to run his own ad server? I'm like,
Mhm.
well, he couldn't because there's only one big ad server. So we didn't want to limit ourselves. So everything is outbound. You talk to parts of the infrastructure, the underlying platform, and there's going to be ports open there. But design from the beginning was this is that infrastructure you speak to can't have anything of any value. So there's no point attacking it. What do I mean by no point of value? I mean it's public data that's cryptographically signed, so you know it's public data and you know it came from Rick. Um, or it's data that's encrypted with keys that that infrastructure never has. So there's literally no point attacking that because there's literally nothing of any value. It's like, I'm gonna break into the safe, but I know there's nothing inside the safe. One of the design decisions are not to have a large infrastructure that handles all this is, sure, you're always going to be open to denial of service attacks, and obviously, there's very little. I mean, Rick's actually the expert on this, not me. You're always going to have denial of service attacks, but if you have a really large surface area, like every single one of the ad signs we have is a different surface area, it's going to be very difficult to, the blast area. If you manage to get attacked, sorry, we will move you around and sort of hide away from bad actors if they're just being annoying. We have all sorts of techniques to do that. But you can't attack the whole system because it's a fully distributed system.
Right.
I think that's sort of state of the art at the moment, but I'd love your opinion on it, Rick. And it's probably the first time you've known some of how this stuff works.
Yeah,
So,
some of it you revealed to me just now. So,
yeah, there you
this is
go.
good. But no, that makes total sense. And of course, as it comes to hacking, when I was a pen tester, we didn't even do denial of service because it's an inevitability. If there's someone out there with enough money, time, and computer resources, you can denial of service anything, including the entire government, right? You mean it can be done if you got enough. That being said, it's not worth it most times, even for something like the government, because you don't get access to most things. You just make things a mess, basically. So what's the point in doing that? So very cool that it's distributed like that. Now I fully understand too that because every at sign is having its own container, when you actually were to or could run this yourself, because you did mention that this is open source, if you'd like to run your own at server, right? You can
Yep.
do that. It's just a function of why would you when it's set up so well? But
It
yeah,
takes a
no,
little bit of watering and feeding, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
no, it's really
we have
cool.
a team here to keep that all those ad servers at scale watered and fed. They need to have certificates updated every so often. They need to have MTLS working. There's a whole bunch of things we do in the background. But what I think is super cool is we can say hand on heart, we cannot see any of your data. Why?
Yep.
We haven't got the keys, right?
The only people who are going to, like I said, that's kind of where I started it because that's the part, in my opinion, that sticks out the most, as with most things like PGP encryption and all of that. But this is extremely important because you can do way more than just simple communication. There's so many things that are possible using @sign. And the only people who are going to see it is the people I say, Colin, Barbara,
Exactly.
myself. That's it. And that's it. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. Can you please elaborate on what exactly AI Architect is securing, particularly the communication and connections between the different agents?
Shall I take that?
I was
So
gonna say, Colin,
AI,
why don't you do
yeah,
that one?
so yeah, AI Architect is essentially a design tool, just like you would be designing a blueprint. So AI Architect actually doesn't do any security at all. It just designs the blueprint for your application to be built on top of the app platform, which is where the security is. So as with most systems, the front end is the sort of shiny front end, and it's where humans interact and all the rest of it. The AI in a sort of workflow does the hard work of actually writing software that uses the app platform, and it's the app platform that's providing the security. So there's multiple ways of getting data from one ad sign to the other, and they're the different types of lines that you draw on an AI architect. So asynchronous communications, it's sort of like it's like very secure email. You send it and you don't know whether anybody's received it. It's it will get there when it gets there when they get online. Synchronous, very similar, but you're sort of presuming that whoever you're talking to is going to be online straight away. All of those things are done in a cryptographically safe manner. They essentially you use your public key so that people can send you a cryptographic key for that data exchange, an AES key in this case. And then data sent with that AES key, and obviously you've got the AES key at both ends, so you can decrypt it. More sophisticated things, so that's sort of going the slow route, if you right. It's sort of going through the platform to get to it. If you want to have a direct TCP session from one ad sign to another, then essentially you can use the underlying platform to set up a direct TCP connection from one place to the other. So if you're doing agentic coding, you want to have agent to agent, you don't go to an API. You literally go from agent to agent with a TCP flow. That TCP flow is AES encrypted. Actually, it's double AES encrypted because there's an AES key for transmit and an AES key for receive. And then you can run whatever protocol you want between agents. So that's the workflow. Workflow is design what your flow is with the AI architect, get the LLM to do the hard work, and then the platform basically provides the security guide rails and makes sure everything's end-to-end encrypted. But Rick, is that sort of, I mean, is that sort of what you feel when you're writing this stuff?
Yeah.
You don't have to, I mean, I'm sure you have to worry about it, but it takes, allows you to focus a lot more on the business flows with
That's
the
kind of what I was going to say when we start talking about cybersecurity. At this point, I think we've covered most of how it works from a cybersecurity perspective and what the security is doing and why it enables it. So, what it enables from a business perspective and a speed perspective and why it matters perspective, in my opinion, is it's just less to be concerned about. It's removing. I don't ever want to say a percentage because then maybe people will be like, that's crazy or won't believe me. But in the 80 to 90% range of things that you would need to be writing for an application like the one I'm writing at NeuroVitals might be different for other things, of course. But in this particular case, it's removing a lot of the infrastructure, IAM setup, the things that I normally would need to have a sophisticated architect that's better than me, certainly better than me to come in and create on these like AWS, GCP, whatever it may be, and make sure it's all developed and implemented correctly. Because I'm always the creator, overseer. I'm not necessarily the person who's going into GCP and doing these security toolings. But with AtSign and the App protocol, I don't have to worry about those things as much. I just let it create the way it's creating it, understanding that the levels and layers of communication are encrypted and no one's going to see them except the intended users. And then the only other thing there is making sure that all of the partners that we work with also join us on the security journey and make sure that they get their at signs and they're also encrypted in the same way. And that's kind of been fun for me because it's gets to show off what you guys are doing. I almost feel like a salesman when I'm doing it. And I always tell them, I'm not trying to sell this to you. I'm literally using it and I need you to use it too. You know what I mean? So
That's
I
great.
mean, how would you do that traditionally, Rick?
how would I do that traditionally? You mean from the security perspective or
Yeah,
teaching?
between business to business.
Oh, yeah. When you go to the enterprise level, you're talking about lots of different analysis and scoring just to make sure that these vendors that you're using have done the right thing in their own application, seeing their pen test if they don't have one, getting them to get a pen test, doing the code review, having a team member or myself go through the process of making sure that they've created code that's secure and still just trusting it because let's be honest, you don't really, unless you are a large enterprise, you don't have the time to make sure that everything is up to par. So that also is removing however much percent of the burden of understanding that to make sure your vendors are following in line. And sometimes you are dealing with startups and because they have a technology that you want to use, but startups notoriously, outside of Atsign, are bad at making sure that code and deployments and whatever they're creating is secure because they're focused on top line revenue, shipping product, especially in the age of AI, right? Because I can ship a product in 3 hours, I need to make sure that it's secure. That adds time, but the executive team wants it in 3 hours. So that's the battle, right?
That is the battle. I have another question here. What if I need to integrate multiple AI agents and applications across my enterprise, which is cloud connected across multiple locations across North America? This would require setting policies for different departments, groups, and people.
Yeah, my understanding of that too, just jumping in even before Colin can answer, is with that protocol and AtSign, that's relatively straightforward because there is policies you can create and they kind of automatically, not automatically, but they route to where they need to go. And again, the people who are going to have access to it are the people who are intended. On the technical side, I'm happy to have Colin fill in where I missed, but that shouldn't be hard at all, based on my understanding.
No, it isn't. There's I mean, exactly what you said in sort of the first dimension. The second dimension is, and you've probably come across this, Rick, as the LLMs start coding as namespaces. So you can um, have a namespace that a particular cryptographic key can get access to, but another cryptographic key can't get access to. So what that means is I can run an agent as @Colin, so the outside world knows me as @Colin, and my agent looks to everybody else as @Colin, but it's running on my behalf. But it only has access to data that I've given it to. So if you imagine, I know I've got an agent that does travel booking for me. So it can only look in the space and see data in the space of travel booking @Colin. So all my travel stuff, all my travel data is in that namespace. And it can't get to bank @Colin because only my banking agent can get to bank @Colin. It still looks like to the outside world like @Colin. If you extend that to an enterprise environment, pick your favorite large enterprise, they can have a single at sign, but have multiple different alter egos, agents, still acting as that enterprise, but within a particular namespace. The cool thing about this is, and I've been speaking to lots of people in the agentic world recently, where they're worried about agents like losing their mind and getting out of control, and you have to have a kill switch. And the kill switch is you just don't accept that key anymore, right? So if literally, we have a UI where we can kill a key, revoke the key. That agent can't do anything anymore. Like this kill switch has gone out of control. We kill it. Once we've got it under control again, we can unrevoke it. It can go back. Or if it's terminal, then we just delete the key. So having that kill switch in an agentic world that's instant rather than trying to. I mean, I've seen other teams like rushing around trying to find the API key to log in and they can't. I mean, I don't want those pains anymore. So,
Okay, obvious answer then is the next thing we do is partnership is @Sign and ClaudeBot because
yes,
everyone's ClaudeBots are
I
taking
think
over their
so.
computers and doing whatever the heck they want to do, and we need to give it a kill switch because I'm even terrified of doing it, and I feel like I have it under control, but I don't even want to run ClaudeBot because it just has to. Granted, you can give it granular permissions. A kill switch would be amazing. So
Yeah,
that's
so a kill
that's
switch per
the
flow, yeah, per action, I guess that Claude can do for you, I think is super cool. So
yeah.
if anybody out there in the Claude team, which I think is one developer, wants to reach out to us, then I'd love to educate them on how this stuff works because I
Yeah.
think that's that mixture of identity and zero exposure to network risks, plus the kill switch is that's a good trifecta to have.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Totally.
Okay, next question. Could you tell me more about the at server in an enterprise context? For large compliance-driven organizations, having their own at server may be a requirement. Exactly, which is why it's available that way.
Yeah, so completely available that way, completely do that. We have lots of deployment ways of working with enterprise size customers, either having their own virtual private cloud where we can manage it at scale for them. I mean, it really depends on the scale. That's perfectly fine. Run it yourself. I think this gets very expensive because these things do take some watering and feeding. But is it possible? Sure, it is. You'd probably need help. We're happy to give it. So yeah, everything's been, I mean, everything, the whole platform's open source. Everything is Dockerized. So we really did not want scale to be a problem. I come from a telco background. Um, and so yeah, this has to scale to billions, not millions, right? So that's sort of where we're at. So all of the above. We also have an interesting thing that I will say is lots of the sort of large scale architecture, if you zoom out, looks very DNS-like because DNS has stood the test of time and it is an external name service, as Barbara mentioned earlier. Um, that just allows you to glue across companies and glue across things that we've never been able to do before. DNS was arrived. So we followed that pattern exactly. But just like DNS, you can have your own private instance of your name service inside your own company. That's fine. And just like DNS, you can have what the DNS people call split horizon, which means if it's in my namespace inside my company, I'm going to deliver one result. If it's not, then I'll go out to the internet and find out what the internet's answer is. So I think it's been very well thought through. By a lot of smart people in the company and in the community around us, being an open source project. So I think we can handle any of the large enterprises use cases without too much problem. But as I say, you can't underestimate. It is difficult to run a service like this, and so yeah, as you do that, you have to bear that in mind in terms of cost.
There's a couple of questions in here about the blueprints and how they're stored.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Atsign being a
Good question.
security company, that's important.
Yeah, so Rick's probably come across this as well. We're very careful not to know anything about what you're doing, and so everything, the whole of the AI architect is an application that's standalone in your browser. And so we don't see literally, we just download you that application inside the browser, and then we don't see anything. Um, and so that means you have to save your files locally, and we know browsers crash, and you accidentally hit the close. It's happened to me. And one of the early features that we added was the oh crap, I've lost my file problem. And so when you go back into it, it would have stored in the background every few milliseconds your last blueprint, and so you can pick it up and reload, save it to disk. But uh, I'm looking for a lot of feedback on that usability. I mean, this is a young product. It's literally 2 weeks old in the marketplace. Rick obviously got an early preview. Um, and thank you for being that brave soul, Rick. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, love more people to give us more feedback, I guess. But yeah, that's how we run it. We literally do. We never want to see anybody's data, and we definitely don't want to see your blueprints unless you give them to us as examples and show off your applications. We're definitely keen for that. Rick, was that a pain point for you, or is it continuing to be a pain point, or is that okay?
Oh, you mean like the file saving and the
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's never been an issue, honestly. Maybe because I run three browser sessions at every time, one with personal crap, one with stuff I'm working on, and another one with personal projects. So like
Yeah,
maybe that's why, and I just didn't close it. But no, not an issue. And then of course exporting it, saving it is easy. Just save it to the local machine. It's no
yeah,
problem. So then it's like you said, it's all yours and yours to control, yours to manage. That being said, um, you guys know this, and I'm happy to share. I wanted feedback on my AI architect map, so I sent it back to you guys and said, "Hey, how do you
yes,
feel about this now that I've created my first version?" Granted, that's not going to work for every company and maybe not a large enterprise, but for us, that's totally fine because of the partnership we have. So
yeah,
I see it as being useful. Not to mention, I will say, I utilized, and it was easy taking that file, giving another engineer on our team the URL and saying, go look at my AI architect map and tell me what you think. And also, I used it as a stepping point to say, does this make sense without them knowing anything? Literally, they didn't know anything about like the app that I was already architecting or like how I was going to architect it. I just said, go look at it, tell me what you think. They came with useful questions back, which means they were able to read it because that's how you know someone actually absorbed it. They were able to ask questions. So good stuff.
Yeah, that's great. So, as Colin said, this product is 2 weeks old. Rick, we're trying to figure out how best to calculate ROI on this. So, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned that you didn't have to build out that underlying infrastructure for security. And you mentioned that it was much faster building the product, even though you were already using AI coding. Any thoughts on other ROI
Yeah.
metrics?
Yeah, well, I'll start with one that may not be measurable, which is it makes me look like a genius, which is great because I don't know if that's actually the
That's actually
reality.
really important.
No, it made me look a very it honestly it enhances all AI does it does this, but I would say AI architect in particular helped enhance what is my skill set because I'm a generalist in a lot of this stuff. I understand coding because I used to read it and I used to break it. I understand cybersecurity because I used to build it and I used to help companies implement it. I understand architecture, I understand AI and LLMs, but when you just go across 5 feet deep, you never have the pure expertise to do something. Now, that being said, this enabled me to create a fully functional application when I've never, as a one or even a small team, launched an application that I coded myself. I was always overseeing other engineers creating things and just reviewing their work and understanding what their commits were and all of that other stuff. This essentially makes me a one-man show with the support of the rest of the team, of course. But the ROI on that is is who knows, not measurable in that sense because like it made my work possible, which may have physically been impossible without it. I don't know. I maybe not impossible, but tremendously more difficult without it. So definitely some ROI there. And then focusing on kind of like what else it can do is speed. It almost enables you to um sometimes I didn't want to say it only took me 3 hours. Not because I what the expectation, but more so, do they trust me? You know what I mean? Does the person reviewing whether but this application, my executive team, do they trust like it took 3 hours? Like, are you lying? Or is this just a mock-up? Or no, 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 it's functional code with a functional back end, functional at work, and it all works the way you would intend, give or take some things related to third parties that I needed to integrate. So part of it was, do I even want to say it took 3 hours? And what is that worth? Because now I have all the other time back to do the the nitpicky details and trying to tune things correctly and the visual design and the user flows that maybe didn't match it because an executive team said something later and they changed it. That gives me all that time back. So it's certainly resource wise, human resource wise, some sort of ROI there that again may not be measurable. Super hard to say, right? Because what's it worth? Well, what's your time worth? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, time and reputation for sure.
right.
Colin, other questions for Rick?
I think my biggest question for Rick is how do you tell other people about this story and keep it believable because it sort of sounds unbelievable.
Yeah.
So
Kind of
what are
a
you telling other people that I mean I know with with your background all the people you interact with don't believe anything because
Yeah, the
they're security
skeptics. Yeah.
expertise. So, like,
Yeah.
how do you tell the story and remain credible?
It's a great question. I have told people that are partners of NeuroVitals, so just other startups, right? That have never heard of Atsign before because of whatever reason. They don't work in the space at all. They're not cybersecurity folks, whatever it may be. They haven't heard of them. I've explained it to them. I've explained it to personal friends who are directors at pen test teams because a lot of my friends that I made back during my pen test days remain friends, and some of them are hyper local. I see them every week, like they're really good friends of mine. And then I've also explained it to people I work with on other projects or executives, even on the executive team for NeuroVitals, who may still not fully understand the full scope of what I'm building and how AtSign fits into it. So I've explained it across maybe 3 or 4 different demographics, and all of them vary slightly. But the way that I talk about it is I usually simplify it. It's what I do actually very well. I take problems and I distill them down into things people can understand. So that's what I try to do with this. Even though I don't consider it complicated myself, someone else might. So I try to distill the vision down to the concept of the communication layer is completely encrypted and safe to the point where you don't have to worry about it because only people who can access it are you and the person who's intended. And now, if the person is sophisticated enough to ask those questions, like my pen test friend, I had to dive into it. And truthfully, he had questions I couldn't have even answered. I actually need to follow up with you on those questions on
Yeah.
an offline because my friend is just so sophisticated with this stuff and has broken everything. He's broken everything. But my understanding is too, and I firmly believe this, is that when we go to the pen test phase, the thing I'm super familiar with NeuroVitals, when we go to that code review pen test phase, there's going to be very little to give them because AtSign is running all of the difficult stuff and attesting to what you guys are doing there in explaining it again. Well, the security is all taken care of because they don't own the data. They don't see the data. The person who owns the data is you on your device here, especially with NeuroVitals being a mobile app. So the person who owns it is the person who's signing the key. So the biggest hurdle comes back down to the Claude classic tale of don't give people stuff that they shouldn't have, you as a person, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what it comes down to. So describing it is not a challenge as much as just making sure I kind of get the information across in a way that's understandable. And then further for the people who do get the technical side, again, proving that it's real and not fake. So who knows? Maybe I need to introduce you to that friend because, like I said, he's a
I
director
really
of
want to
pen
be
test friend.
introduced, Rick. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the project really thrived on finding somebody who's really deep into the security,
Hmm.
and then asking them who's the scariest individual you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then
Okay.
getting some really good feedback. And we've done that religiously throughout the
Okay.
company, and I wouldn't say we found sort of gaping holes, but we've certainly found some really nuanced feedback that we could, improve, right? Which is
Hmm.
deep in the weeds of the cryptography. We're not cryptographers, so
Right. Sure.
um, yeah, I mean, welcome anybody who's listening as well that thinks they could, contribute to the project. Reach out to us directly and
Need a
take a
at
look at the
sign
code.
hackathon.
Yeah. Oh, that the answer to everything is always have a hackathon. So yeah,
Hmm.
very very keen on that.
Yeah.
It would be that would actually be a fun thing to do, an AI architect hackathon, and
Yeah.
because
Hey, let's do it. You heard it here.
that would be a lot of fun. Yeah, that was my main question, Barbara. Like, I had to retell the story because if you can't retell the story, then yeah, we're not going to be able to get the word out. That's what, it sounds like it's retellable, and it sounds like as Rick's got used to the environment, he's having conversations with some of the people that are providing traditionally APIs
Oh
with
yeah.
ports open, all the rest of it, and not just having a direct interaction without having this game of chicken. Like you open up your ports, no, you open up your ports, which
Hmm.
I know I know in my history on Wall Street, we always used to have that sort of game of chicken. Then we, spend a whole bunch of money to have a lease line between data centers. None of that's needed anymore.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. I really want to thank you, Rick, for your time
Of course.
and input and articulation of this because it's awesome. And then I also want to talk just for a minute about, in 2 weeks, we're going to have another one of these, and we're going to show a WhatsApp clone that was created with AI Architect, and it was created by the original person who thought up AI Architect. So that should be fun. And you can actually, the map will be available and you can create your own end-to-end encrypted WhatsApp. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you, Rick, so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Thanks for everybody watching.
Thank you.